One of the most difficult elements of being a landlord is dealing with unruly tenants who don't pay the rent. It's more frustrating when they leave without warning, leaving behind a huge mess that'll take ages to clean up. What happened to me was far worse than any of that, and more like one of those terrifying ghost stories you hear about. My property was in a good neighborhood and in good condition, so when I realized they'd fled, I was concerned. They'd lived in the house for over 8 months and had paid the rent on time, right up until they took off. When I got a call from one of the neighbors telling me they heard strange noises, I went over to investigate. From the outside, the place looked fine, but when I got inside, I nearly threw up. The filth and stench was awful. It seemed as though they deliberately let the place go, but I felt there was something more sinister going on. I tried not to get emotional as I walked around and surveyed the wreckage. Then I heard a sloshing sound coming from upstairs. I knew I had to go upstairs, and even though the electricity was still connected, I took my time to get there. The strange sloshing sounds grew louder with each step. As I approached the top of the stairs, I also heard moaning. I wasn't sure if the voice was a human, the air conditioning, the plumbing, or even an animal. Turned out, it was none of those. Although I didn't know it at the time, I had a hunch that I was about to come across something not of this earth. For some unknown reason, I kept going, even though I was trembling and shuddering while my legs went to jelly. As soon as I put my hand on the bathroom door handle, the sloshing and moaning stopped. I opened the door. What happened next was so surreal, I was sure that I was in the middle of a nightmare. The light flickered as my eyes were distracted by the terrible grime and mold that had taken over. At first, I didn't see the woman peering over the edge of the bath. But then I saw the black holes where her eyes were supposed to be. Scared stiff, I could only watch as she slapped a wet hand over the edge and onto the floor. Her long, dark, tangled hair clung to her twisted body. Her skin was almost translucent and streaked with blood. I have no problem telling you that I was shaking in my boots. Then the other hand hit the floor and I jumped. Her face was trained on me as she hoisted herself up and over the rim of the tub while the moaning started again. The sensible side of me tried to rationalize the scene as a drug addict who'd been squatting on my property. That's when I asked in a shaky voice, "Can I help you?" I regretted those words as her face became more grotesque. To this day, I can't believe what I saw next. Her face opened up like a flip-top trash can as the top jaw spread backwards. It looked like she was turning inside out as she slithered towards me. I screamed and turned around and raced off as fast as I could. Then the police arrived. They never found the slithering monster and probably thought I was crazy. I wish that was the case, as it would have been far easier to believe. There are things that happen in everyday life that we're unable to explain. Images, sounds, and movements that frighten our psyche and make us question if what we witnessed actually happened or if it was just part of our imaginations. One of these events happened to me last month. I live in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. I like to take frequent hikes through the trails close to my apartment. I've always had this fascination with nature. It's always been a personal hobby of mine. I love taking in landscapes of forests, absorbing the peaceful environment around me. Usually I take walks with friends who share my passion, but oftentimes I feel like they can slow me down. A lot of my buddies aren't in the best physical shape, so they can often complain and move kind of slowly. On this particular day, I got home from work around 5 and decided to take a hike by myself. I set off on the trail a little later. It was cool outside, so I decided to jog the hike, which was about 4 miles in length. I passed by a few other people on the trail, but not many. There didn't seem to be a lot of people hiking this day. As I neared the end of the first pass, it started to get a little darker out, and I stopped seeing anyone on the trail. For some reason, even though I didn't see anybody, I got the eerie sense that I was being followed by something. So I started to quicken my pace. After the halfway point, dusk was upon me, and out of nowhere, it started to get foggy out. The air around me started to turn into a dark, gray haze. At first, it was just a thin layer, but as my hike continued, it started to get so bad that I couldn't see 6 feet in front of me. My heart rate started jacking up with the feeling of something still following me through the fog. I wanted to turn around to convince myself that I was imagining things, but I was too afraid to stop. Sick of feeling paranoid, I came to a sudden stop. I turned around, and there through the haze was a woman standing a few yards away from me. I knew there was no one else on the trail, as I didn't pass anybody after the halfway point. Panicking, I started running as fast as I could back to my car. I looked back again, and the woman was still the same distance away. She just stood there, looking right through me. I just kept running, hoping to get away from the mysterious figure. My heart was pounding. Sweat was dripping from my forehead as I breathed heavy. I was about to have a full-on panic attack until I noticed the fog slowly disappearing from around me. I looked back, and the mysterious woman had vanished. I kept running quickly until I got to the end of the trail, finally reaching my car. Ever since that day, I've been too afraid to take hikes alone. That was 1 month ago. I've tried to replay the events in my head, hoping to convince myself that I'm not crazy. I don't know what the mysterious figure in the fog wanted, but I feel in my bones that I barely escaped with my life that day. Getting your tonsils out isn't exactly a nightmare, unless you're already afraid of hospitals or blood. At the age of 11, I was afraid of both, notwithstanding real scary stories, one of which happened to me. After 3 years of recurring bouts of tonsillitis, I was admitted to the hospital amid promises of ice cream and jello. I awoke in the recovery ward, completely alone and still drowsy, wondering where the nurses were. Hearing a noise at the other end of the ward, I turned my head, only to see a silhouette in the shadows. I could make out the figure of a woman, seemingly dressed as a nurse, but there was something strange about her. Before I could gesture to get her attention, she slowly turned and started creeping towards me. I felt the chill in the air as she approached, with her hands outstretched, murmuring quietly to herself. It wasn't until she reached my side and looked down at me when I realized she didn't have eyes at all. There were strange markings all over her face, like she'd been decorated with war paint or streaks of blood. I tried to scream, but my throat was so sore. I thrashed about as she bent down, her face only inches away from mine. I thought my life was over. I could smell the blood and saw that the streaks were still fresh, but something else came to mind. She seemed to be a native or tribal warrior, but what tribe or what place? Hell, I couldn't be sure. What chilled me to the bone was the fact that there seemed to be eyeballs moving under her skin. With one last thrash, the lights suddenly came on and she was gone. A real nurse came over to me and admonished me for thrashing around, telling me to get some sleep. I tried to tell her about the nurse from the shadows, but before I knew it, my own eyes were closing up. Not realizing that I'd been given a sedative, I slipped into what I thought would be a welcome sleep. It wasn't until I came to, standing at the foot of my bed, when it dawned on me that I was now the shadow nurse. I could just make out the shape of the bed and heard my own muffled screams coming from my sore throat. What was stranger still was that I now had the perspective of the shadow nurse, and I knew what she wanted. I could feel the blood drying on my face and felt the eyeballs rolling around, desperately trying to see. A curse had been placed on me, and I knew I had to take control of this young body in order to break the spell. As I leaned over my own body, I was afraid for my own endangered life, yet I felt the nurse's need to escape. Just as I felt my new persona filtered towards my writhing body on the bed, the lights came on again. In a flash, I was back in my body, sitting completely upright and looking everywhere for that nurse in the shadows. I slept with the light on from that day forward. I never saw her again.